Hi everybody. We came to Topkapı Palace today. So there is a construction is going on back there. It is really hot today, so I'm gonna cover Topkapı Palace today. So let me show you the first gate of the Topkapı Palace. Okay, I hope you can hear me. I'm gonna explore the Topkapı Palace using one of the most important scholarly works on the subject as my main reference, Gülru Necipoğlu's masterpiece, Architecture, Ceremonial, and Power, the Topkapı Palace in the 15th and 16th century. Much of what I'm going to share with you today is based on the Necipoğlu's research and interpretations in this book. I'll be walking through the palace and explaining how its architecture, ceremonies, and organization reflected the power and the structure of the Ottoman court. Okay, this is the Babu Humayun. Now we come to the Imperial Gate. Okay, Gate repeats the theme of imperial power through its large gilt Arabic inscription here. Inscription was signed by the calligrapher Ali bin Yahya al-Sufi and dated to 1478. It represents the Mehmet II as the Sultan of the two continents, Emperor of the two seas, the shadow of God, the ruler of the world, and the conqueror of Constantinople. So even the inscription on the entrance presents this place as the center of the imperial authority. Above the inscription, actually, there was also a Quranic quotation from verses 15, column 45, 48. And these verses create a symbolic connection between the imperial gate and the gates of paradise, and between the royal palace and the garden even. The imagery emphasizes peace, security, gardens, fountains, and freedom from suffering. So the gate shouldn't simply be understood as a defensive fortress. Although the swords, guns, bows, and arrows were displayed inside its domed vestibule, their purpose was not to defend the palace. They reminded visitors that soldiers entered a peaceful palace without their weapons. Okay, now let's go inside. Okay, so you're gonna have a security check here. This is the first gate, Imperial Gate, Marble Terrace. So you can see outside from the first gate. You see the blue mosque over there. Okay. Now we are gonna go to the security check first. Then we're gonna walk through the first court. Here on the right hand side, you see the Yol Marmara and the entrance for the Bosphorus Strait. And Asian side, it's a very beautiful spot. Okay. It's just a simple security check. You just simply put your backpacks into the X-ray machine, like Ayasofya, and then you enter. Okay, everybody. So we just entered to the first courtyard, and on the left-hand side, you see a church. It is the Aya Irini Church. Hagia Irene, it's meaning peace. Actually, it is as old as the Ayasofya. Ayasofya is over there, and 6th century AD it was built. And as you can see, there is no minarets around it. That means the Ottomans didn't change it into the mosque, and they just used it as a storage of weapons, weaponry. And today it is just part of the first courtyard. So now we are gonna walk the first courtyard, everybody, here, the first courtyard. So what is Topkapı? When we think about Topkapı Palace, we usually imagine the residence of the Ottoman sultans. But Topkapı was much more than a royal residence. It was a stage for displaying the dynastic power, administrative center of a vast empire, a palace school, and the private residence of the royal family, hidden behind a strong sense of secrecy. This was actually a huge complex: workshops, armories, hospitals, stables, kitchens, bakeries, baths, audiences, treasuries, mosques, dormitories, pavilions, sports cars, fountains, gardens. Thousands of people worked here, lived here as part of the Sultan's household. They were divided between the inner or private and outer or public services of the royal household. And notice something important about Topkapı. Its imperial power was not expressed through one enormous monument. Unlike a great European palaces, one gigantic, enormous building, for example, Topkapı Palace horizontally across a huge area. That enormous horizontal organization itself communicated the complexity of the institution and the hierarchy of the people who kept the palace running. Today we see Topkapı as a museum. It may look as if the palace simply grew over the centuries because different sultans kept adding new buildings and new places. But its early history tells us something different. And now we can see the second gate. Even after the centuries of remodeling, its basic layout remains remarkably close to the original design. This is incredible. The reason is that the palace's ceremonial and institutional organization carried such strong imperial symbolism that major changes were difficult. So the basic structure of Topkapı preserved an Ottoman language of imperial power. Look at the gate. The second gate of the Topkapı Palace, everybody. Here you can see. Today it's so crowded. There was a direct connection between the palace's architecture and its ceremonies and the centralized state it served, actually. Topkapı embodied an Ottoman imperial tradition that emerged in the 15th century and became consolidated in the 16th. It is architecture and its ceremonies repeated over generations made the Ottoman political system and its concept of sovereignty visible. The palace housed and shaped a centralized system of imperial government administered by the Sultan's household slaves, known as the Kapıkulu. This system was designed to protect the Sultan's central authority by preventing the rise of a hereditary aristocracy powerful enough to challenge the Ottoman dynasty. So Topkapı was not simply a place where the government happened to operate. Its architecture and institutions were organized around this centralized political system. You can buy the tickets here. Yeah, it's real crowded. Okay, the foundation of the palace was built on the hilltop using the original retaining walls of the ancient Acropolis to deal with the steep slope leading down toward the sea. But the organization of the palace was not simply determined by the landscape. It also followed traditional organization of the Ottoman Imperial military camp. In the Imperial camp, tents had different functions and were placed according to a predetermined order. The palace actually followed a similar two-part organization. This spatial arrangement of the imperial tents, the Otayi Humayun, was described as the Ottoman order, or the order of Ottoman tradition. Mehmet II and centralized power. Mehmet II radically changed the power structure of the empire. He counterbalanced the power of the landed aristocracy by creating a bureaucratic elite, mostly of slave origins. At the same time, he transformed the religious scholars attached to the Ottoman madrasas into salaried employees of the centralized state. The scholars connected to the Sultan's own mosque complex ranked highest among them. In this way, Mehmet II fundamentally transformed power base of the empire. Okay, still we are in the first court. The huge open space of the first court was where the entire court could assemble on important occasions. For example, at the Mehmet II's funeral in 1481, around 25,000 slave soldiers who formed part of the Sultan's extended household gathered here. They were joined by 200 Ks from the inner palace. Together, they formed a procession to the Sultan's tomb at his Imperial Mosque complex. But the first court was also the first stage in the ceremonial experience of foreign visitors. A series of illustrations prepared around 1586 for the Habsburg ambassador eventually shows how a foreign ambassador entered this court. This time, the Austrian Habsburgs were required to bring gifts to the Sultan every year as tribute. The ambassador entered through the Imperial Gate with a large group of Ottoman officials. He passed Hagia Sophia and followed the paved path through the first court, and the court was filled with minor palace officials, servants, and people on horseback. But when he reached the second gate here, everyone riding a horse had to dismount. From that point onwards, silence was imposed. Anyone who broke the rule could be beaten with a stick. The visual impact of the first court came less from monumental architecture and more from the people and animals occupying it. There were richly dressed cavalry, soldiers riding valuable horses with jeweled equipment, as well as exotic animals. The buildings themselves were mostly functional with red tiled roofs. The more prestigious buildings in the second and third courts, of course, and they had lead covered roofs. But here in this area, the service buildings were made from cheaper materials such as wood and rubble masonry and required regular maintenance. As a result, very few of them survived. And there was an important change as you moved through the palace. The visitor moved from the noise of the first court towards the silence of the deeper courts. The farther you went, the quieter it became. This reached its highest point in the third court, which was as silent as a sanctuary except during rare festive occasions. Okay, this is Bab Salam, the middle gate, everybody. You can see here. This is the middle gate, Bab Salam, gate of peace. The name refers to the peaceful paradise of an age that visitor encountered after entering the second court. On the inner side of the gate facing the garden, there was a Quranic inscription that also compared this space to the gates opening into the Garden of Eden. After dismounting in front of the double towered gate, the visitors crossed the threshold and entered beneath a grand portico with 10 marble columns. And suddenly the second court became visible. The contrast was striking. From the outside, the gate looked strongly military. Inside, the visitors saw an almost paradisal garden. The middle gate was also connected with the administration of justice. After the Imperial Council met, the two Kazakhstars heard cases of the ordinary people in the vaulted entrance area here. Both Muslim and non-Muslim subjects could bring their cases before this highest court of justice. Raised platforms on the either side of the entrance were used for this purpose. Portico on the inner side of the gate also had an administrative function. Senior military officials occupied the platforms on either side, so the middle gate was not simply an entrance. Its castle-like exterior, weapons, prison, and platforms used for military justice prepared the visitor for the themes of public justice and victory that dominated the second floor. Okay, now let's go to the second court. Okay, second court. The second court was a completely enclosed rectangular garden. There were trees and lawns, stone paths, tall cypress trees, and animals such as ostriches, peacocks, deer, and gazelles. Golden drinking cups hung from many fountains on chains. The court must have been completed by around 1465. Its masonry buildings were covered with lead roofs, emphasizing the prestige of this part of the palace. On the right side, you can see the imperial kitchens, and on the left-hand side, Sultan's stables. There were fountains supplying water for the kitchens and the horses. And ahead, the Tower of Justice, the Council Hall, and the public treasury. So the second court was the administrative heart of the palace. It was also modeled on the administrative section of the Ottoman Imperial Military Camp, as we mentioned before. Sultan was not there. There is something fascinating about this courtyard. The third gate stood at the center of the second court, emphasized by a domed canopy and a grand marble colonnade. Under Mehmed II, the Sultan used to appear here during communal banquets and present himself to his courtiers. But after the regulations established in his Kanunname by the 16th century, the sultans had stopped appearing here except on the religious holidays, at their accession, and during times of crisis. So the second court became something like a magnificent theater. There was a very large cast, but the principal actor almost never appeared on stage. The ceremony is centered on a ruler who was physically absent. His symbolic presence was represented by the third gate and the chamber of petitions beyond it. The administrative buildings were placed to the left rather than in the center. This spatial arrangement expressed the subordinate position of the bureaucrats in relation to the Sultan. This reflected the Ottoman political concept of the port or kapı. The state and justice were administered in front of the Sultan's gate by members of his household and his administrator. So the port was both a physical place and an abstract idea of government. Okay, justice and Ottoman sovereignty. Ottomans didn't have an impressive genealogy to legitimize their rule. Instead, they emphasized their success as warriors for the Islamic faith and their reputation as just rulers. Because justice was so important to their legitimacy, they developed the secular extra Sharia dimension of law known as Kanun. Administering justice was considered the most important function of the Ottoman state. And the Imperial Council, the highest organ of the state, was essentially a high court of justice. That is why the second court was so strongly associated with justice. Contemporary texts call it the arena of justice, and the council hall was described as the hall of the council of justice. Connection was not accidental. The second court was founded by Mehmed II and later developed architecturally and ceremonially under the Suleiman the Lawgiver, Suleiman the Magnificent. Both rulers were associated with imported kanunnames. The invisible Sultan justice was administered in the name of the Sultan in the council hall, but the Sultan could secretly watch the proceedings through a curtained window. Let's go there and let me show you the rooms. So although he was secluded and delegated authority to his officials, he was still presented as personally ensuring that no injustice was committed against his subjects. He was visible, but his presence was always felt. Officials found guilty of injustice in the Sultan's name could be imprisoned at the middle gate and executed in front of the executioner's fountain. The Sultan could watch these executions from his pavilion in the Tower of Justice. When prisoners begged for forgiveness, he could open one of the latticed shutters of the pavilion, making his presence known. The royal window in the council hall and the Tower of Justice therefore created a paradox. The Sultan was physically absent, but symbolically omnipresent. The cycle of equity, the public treasury represented the Sultan's wealth over there. The kitchens represented his generosity. Together, these buildings express an ancient Near Eastern idea known as the cycle of equity. There could be no state without an army, no army without revenues, no revenues without prosperity, no prosperity without justice, and no justice without the state. So the buildings of the second court connected wealth, the army, prosperity, and justice. Accumulation of wealth supported the state and the administration of justice, which in turn protected the Sultan's subjects. Together, these ideas helped legitimize the Ottoman political system. The Imperial Council during the Mehmet II's reign, Council Hall was located at the Tower of Justice. The Grand Vizier's council met here 4 days a week to administer justice in the Sultan's name. Any subject could bring a case here, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, male or female. Grand Vizier received ambassadors here. The two Kazaskers and viziers sat on a carpet-covered bench here. The Nishancı, who placed the Sultan's Tuğla signature on imperial documents, had his assigned place. The two defterdars or finance ministers also had their own positions. Behind them was the chancery, where about 50 secretaries recorded the proceedings. Over there, imperial records and archives were kept there in a chest sealed with the Grand Vizier's seal. At the end of every year, the accumulated records were transferred to the treasury. Okay, four pillars of the state. The Süleyman's rebuilt council hall consists of three domed halls with an L-shaped marble portico. The three spaces were known as the council hall, the chancery, and archive chambers. The seating arrangement inside represented the centralized Ottoman state. The Grand Vizier sat directly beneath the royal window. Kazaskers, viziers, nishancı, and finance ministers had their assigned positions. Ottoman writers compared the system to a domed tent supported by four great pillars. These four pillars represented the viziers, the Kazaskers, the defterdars responsible for finance and archives, and the nishancı responsible for the chancery. All four worked under the authority of the Sultan. The royal window directly above the Grand Vizier emphasized his position as the chief representative of the invisible Sultan. And foreign ambassadors, second court was also a stage for displaying the Sultan's power. Foreign ambassadors, 4 days a week, important embassies could be received in a special ceremony called the Galebe Divan and the Council of Victory. Courtiers had to be present in their finest uniforms and stand in carefully organized ranks. The court could be decorated with precious textiles, carpets, and curtains brought out from the public treasury. The richness of the decoration depended on the importance of the embassy. Sometimes wild animals and horses with jeweled harnesses were also displayed near the stables. After getting off his horse in front of the middle gate, the ambassador walked through the second court in a solemn procession. At certain points, stopped and saluted groups of officials. These stopping points were marked by porphyry stones known as salam taşları or salutation stones. Inside the council hall, he was received by the Grand Vizier. Food was then brought from the imperial kitchens as a gesture of the Sultan's hospitality. Finally, the ambassador was taken into the third court to appear before the Sultan. The imperial kitchens, look at the monumental kitchens on the right side of the second court. They were dominated by 10 pairs of tall cylindrical chimneys. But these were much more than places where food was prepared. Eating food prepared in the imperial kitchens was an important part of the palace ceremony. From the earliest days of the Ottoman dynasty, sharing the Sultan's food represented allegiance to him. The kitchens, therefore, had a strong symbolic meaning. They also communicated the generosity of the Sultan. Food was distributed not only to the royal household and the palace staff, but also to slaves, soldiers, officials of the Imperial Council, and official guests. Okay. The third gate, Gate of Felicity, Babu Saadeh, stood at the center of the second court. A royal colonnade in front of it had an important symbolic role. It was the architectural equivalent of the open, umbrella-like royal tent used in the imperial military camp. When the Sultan appeared before his people, the domed canopy reproduced the form of this royal umbrella tent. It was therefore a clear symbol of sovereignty, and this gate marks an important transition. We are moving from the administrative and public world of the second court towards the private world of the Sultan. But before that, let's go to the harem section first. Harem. Okay, the harem. The growing political power of royal women and black eunuchs was visible in the architecture itself. Their quarters were located directly behind the audience gate. During Muad III's reign, the chief black eunuch began holding big audiences at the gate concerning the royal wax after their administration was transferred from the white eunuchs. Royal women and black eunuchs increasingly gained influence over appointments because of their proximity to the secluded sultan. Although royal women were hidden from public view, they could exercise political power through black eunuchs and Jewish women known as kiras. These women lived outside the palace but were allowed to enter the harem freely. They taught embroidery and medicinal knowledge, sold fashionable goods, acted as intermediaries with outside the world. Royal women also demonstrated their power by commissioning monumental public buildings supported by wealth wax. Wakuf, they had surprisingly good access to political information because the harem was located directly next to the public council hall. The quarters of the black eunuchs were located in a separate courtyard between the public council hall in the second court and the court of concubines. Their quarters extended from a gate connecting them with the second court to another gate leading into the main harem. The entrance opened into a domed vestibule, large cupboards lined here, and its walls and were probably used to store documents concerning the royal wakufs, wax, administered by the chief black eunuch. Another vestibule opened onto a narrow courtyard here, leading to the golden road, golden path, and all the way to the Sultan's privy chamber in the third court. There was a mosque, a long three-story dormitory, the chief black eunuch's apartment, his bath, and a school for princes. The princes' teachers were brought to the school every day by the black eunuchs so that they wouldn't see the women of the harem. The classroom was sometimes used for secret meetings, The queen mother could even listen to some meetings from behind the curtain. Yeah, here you can see nice, beautiful tiles, the mosque, prayer niche of the black eunuchs, little masjid. And here crown princess rooms, and there is a little dwarf's rooms in there. And the Hasikis and concubines. Yes, second in rank after the queen mother was the sultan's first wife, known as the Bash Hasiki or Bash Kadın. Her apartments were in a separate courtyard next to the queen mother's quarters, today known as the court of concubines. The other Hasekis had progressively smaller households and more modest apartments according to their rank. Now we are entering to the courtyard way of the queen mother and the concubine's place. The young woman lived in a large two-story dormitory. At night, lights were kept burning. During the day, older women taught them to read, speak Turkish, and play music. They also had periods of recreation. Only a small number of the women in the harem became the sultan's consorts. Most were young girls who received full-time education before being promoted to serve the sultan or royal members of the royal family. The central purpose of the women's system was not simply sexuality. Dynastic continuity and reproduction were fundamental. Harem gradually developed from a small residence for slave girls to a large family domain controlled by the queen mother, followed by the royal wives and chief matron. And here are the concubines and consorts' room. The growing size of the harem was therefore not a necessarily a sign of sexual excess. Maintaining, educating, and supervising young women brought from different parts of the world required a highly developed administrative organization. That organization itself became a visible sign of the power, prestige, and wealth of the Ottoman dynasty. The succession system, when a royal consort became pregnant, she was moved to the old palace, where the Sultan's wives, children, and mother lived. If she had a son, the prince was raised there. Later, the mother accompanied him to the province where he was sent to govern as part of his education. There was no system of primogeniture, primogeniture, primogeniture. Princes born to different mothers therefore had to compete for the throne through their abilities and political skill. Prince who gained the support of the military elite and took control of Topkapı Palace and its treasury was enthroned at the gate of Felicity. According to a clause in Mehmet II's Kanunname, he then eliminated brothers in order to secure his absolute power. Once her son became Sultan, his mother became the queen mother and the respected matriarch of the dynasty. Okay, here you can see the pantry room of the concubines. Hürrem Sultan, famous Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent's my wife, Roxolana, gained undisputed control of the harem after the Mustafa's mother left with her son. Hürrem Sultan, Süleyman's favorite concubine, also known as Roxolana, gained undisputed control of the harem after Prince Mustafa's mother left with her son and the queen mother died. Sources agree that Hürrem convinced Süleyman to marry her, despite this going against the usual practice of the sultans. After the marriage, she moved from the old palace to Topkapi with her children. Unlike earlier royal consorts, she had several sons and a daughter. Her permanent move to the Topkapi harem with her children foreshadowed the complete abandonment of the old palace by the royal family after Suleiman's reign. Here you can see laundry room. From this point onward, the sultans increasingly lived a secluded life within the family atmosphere of the harem. Nurban remained the undisputed mistress of the harem from her husband's accession until her death in 1583. She was aware of her political power and frequently influenced her son's political decisions, including his peace policy toward Venice. She exchanged letters with European monarchs and used networks of patronage within the Ottoman Empire. Because she couldn't have direct contact with the outside world, she used intermediaries. Nurbanu became one of the first queen mothers to play a dominant political role. This development eventually culminated in the 17th century reign of women. She was also the first queen mother to officially use the title Valide Sultan. The new apartments built for her in the Topkapi harem expressed her unprecedented authority. Haseki's Murat III's enlarged harem included apartments for his many wives. Before reaching the higher ranks, young slave girls lived together in a large dormitory. They were educated by older women under the supervision of the chief matron, the Kahya Kadın. Once a girl became the Sultan's consort, she received her own room, attendants, kitchen, servants, a eunuch, and a higher salary. If she became pregnant, uh, her income, servants, and living quarters increased. Haseki, who gave birth to the Sultan's child, received special privileges. She moved into a larger private apartments with a larger household. The first woman to give birth to a son had precedence over the others. First son eventually became sultan. She would become the queen mother and the absolute mistress of the harem. Yeah, harem becomes a family residence under Murat III. The harem became very different from Mehmet II's original arrangement. The earlier harem had mainly been a training ground for slave concubines. The sultan's wives, children, and mother had lived in the old palace. Now new apartments were built inside the harem. The harem was becoming a family residence. At the same time, the sultan became increasingly secluded inside the women's quarters. The political space he left behind was increasingly occupied by powerful royal women and black eunuchs who acted as their intermediaries with the outside world. Okay. The first queen mother to live permanently in the enlarged harem of Topkapi was Safiye, the mother of Mehmet III. In her throne room, she received gifts from European kings and queens who hoped that she would influence her son's decisions in their favor. She could also communicate with the outside world through intermediaries. After the Sultan left, the Queen Mother received a chief black eunuch who administered the royal works and handled her business affairs. She then had lunch surrounded by a large female household. This included a treasurer, accountant, waiter, pantry keeper, laundress, bather, stoker, tester, coffee maker, and water carrier. After lunch, she was entertained by buffons, dancers, and singers. Then a female reader would read a passage from the Quran or from a history book. Sometimes the Sultan's wives also visited her. This corridor leads us to the Imperial Hall. Now let's go there. Let me show you the Sultan's bath here. Hünkâr Hamamı, Sultan's Hamam, which was built by the architects in the late 16th century. You can see here. Imperial Hall. The Imperial Hall is the harem's main assembly space. The decorations we see today are largely European influenced and date from renovations under Osman III between 1754 and 57. The hall is a large domed room. There is a raised platform facing the garden, a musician's gallery, and the Sultan's canopy throne. The hall also has wall fountains and doors leading to the royal baths, queen mother's quarters, Muattatur's bedroom, and the central courtyard of the harem. The hall functioned as the formal assembly place of the harem. Official ceremonies and festivities took place here in the presence of the enthroned sultan. During religious holidays, after receiving congratulations from the pages in the old privy chamber, the sultan came here to meet the women of the harem. They stood before him, bowed, and wished him happy holidays. The sultan did not answer them. Instead, he smiled and looked at them while an eunuch presented him with jewels and bags of gold coins. He personally gave each woman a jewel and money that she could distribute it to her servants. This is also the harem's entertainment hall. We can say the imperial hall was also the harem's entertainment hall. Sultans listened to female musicians and were entertained by singers and comedians. When a sultan wanted music or dancing, the chief matron selected the woman who would perform. Sometimes pages were brought into the harem blindfolded by eunuchs to perform in front of the woman. So this was not simply a residential room, it was a ceremonial and entertainment space at the heart of the harem. Okay, from here we are moving to the Murat III's bedroom. Murat III ordered the harem to be enlarged and rebuilt. Sinan added a domed pavilion for the Sultan's new bedroom. It is the only 16th century building in the harem that preserves some of its original interior decoration. The bathroom is decorated with Iznik tiles to the springing of the gilt stone. Continuous band of the continuous band of tile inscriptions include pains the Quranic throne verses. The verse refers to the absolute sovereignty of God in heaven and earth and to divine legitimacy of rulers. There is also a gilt bronze fireplace framed by classical Islamic tiles decorated with small plum blossoms. Over there, opposite, it is a three-tiered marble fountain. Here, bedroom remains an important example of classical Ottoman place architecture with its proportions. Islamic tiles, marble niches, marble pearl, window shutters, and floral decorations. When Murat III came from Manisa to succeed his father in 1574, he first sat on the throne in the privy chambers. When he entered the harem to meet his mother Nuban, that same night he had his five younger brothers strangled before his public accession ceremony the following day. The new sultan was dissatisfied with the harem. He therefore rebuilt and enlarged it, creating new quarters for the queen mother, his many consorts, and the black eunuchs. He also gave the black eunuchs greater authority over the white eunuchs. The harem transformation started. The harem had always existed Topkapi, but originally it was relatively small. It housed slave concubines rather than the royal family until the second half of the 16th century. The white eunuchs who supervised the palace pages also controlled the harem. But in the last quarter of the 16th century, this changed. The chief black eunuch gradually became the most powerful official of the imperial household. The turning point came around the beginning of Murat III's reign. As the political influence of the harem increased, the black eunuchs took over much of the authority previously held by the white eunuchs. Okay, young slave girls were brought from different parts of the empire, captured during conquests, or presented as gifts. Those selected for their physical beauty were converted to Islam and placed under strict discipline. They were taught religion etiquette, music, embroidery, sewing, dancing, singing, storytelling, reading, and writing according to their abilities. They were organized into a hierarchy similar to that of the male pages. Their clothing and wages were provided by the Sultan's treasury according to their rank. Only a small number became the Sultan's consorts, by the way, and had children. The others served as attendants and servants. And actually, the system changed. And why the system changed? The early Ottoman sultans had married princesses from Muslim principalities in Anatolia, Christian rules in the Balkans, or the Byzantine imperial family. After the conquests of the Constantinople, the system of slave concubines developed alongside the system of palace pages. This reflected the creation of a centralized empire that had observed neighboring states. There were no longer neighboring princes whose status could match that of the Ottoman Sultan. So after Mehmed II, the dynasty was increasingly continued through the children of slave concubines raised in the palace, like the system of palace pages. This strengthened the Sultan's centralized power and helped to limit the autonomy of aristocratic families. And the cage, cafes, twin pavilions. Another factor that helped the harem become a dominant political force was the change in the education of princes. After the end of the 16th century, princes were no longer sent to govern provinces. Instead, they were confined inside the women's quarters in a group of rooms like this, known as the cage or cafes. The purpose was to protect their lives, but this also meant that the princes grew up under the influence of the women and the eunuchs around them. It allowed harem factions to help place weak sultans on the throne, including rulers who were children or mentally unable to govern. During the second half of the 17th century, by the way, you can see a beautiful tiles here. Some sultans spent much of their time hunting in Edirne or pursuing sensual pleasures. Edirne is, the second capital of the Ottoman Empire. Meanwhile, powerful royal women increasingly controlled politics. Yes, Golden Path, Golden Road. The Golden Path originally allowed the Sultan to move unseen from his privy chambers to the royal window overlooking the council hall or to the room of a favorite. Later, the same corridor allowed royal women and black eunuchs to watch political discussions in the council hall through a small circular opening above the Sultan's royal window. That opening can still be seen today. Okay, okay, this is the golden rod connecting the Sultan's privy chamber, the black eunuchs corridor passage, and directly to the council hall. There's a little kitchen here. Okay, now we are entering to the third court. This is Bab's side. You can see the silahbaras, the sword bearers, and now we are entering to the third court. The third court was where the Sultan lived with his family and his inner household. It was also a palace school. Young male and female slaves selected for palace education were trained under the supervision of eunuchs and preachers. Left hand side, the exit of the harem. We just got out of from harem. So they were educated to serve the sultan loyally. Later, they could be married and promoted important bureaucratic positions in the centralized administration of the empire. So the third court had two functions. It was the royal household, and it was a school for ruling elites. Here, the Sultan cultivated fatherly relationships with future administrators of his empire. Court was divided into distinct sections. There was the male section where royal pages lived under the supervision of white eunuchs. There was the female section where the women of the palace lived under the protection of black eunuchs. And there was a walled hanging garden today associated with the fourth court. I'm gonna take you there too. But here ahead of us, the Chamber of Petitions. The Chamber of Petitions was a place where the Sultan's power was publicly displayed. Foreign gifts were deliberately presented before the small window from which the Sultan could see them. A gift from the King of France, for example, was carried across the court and passed twice in front of the window here. So it was then carried around the palace so that people could see that one of the greatest Christian rulers had sent it to the Ottoman Sultan. The purpose was to demonstrate power and grandeur of the Ottoman ruler. The display was not limited to diplomatic gifts. War booty and even hats of defeated enemies could be displayed before the Sultan. Young Christian boys recruited for service in the Ottoman army and administration were also brought before the same window. The Sultan could select the boys he considered the most handsome and noble looking to become palace pages. Okay, the Sultan in the Chamber of Petitions. Inside the chamber, with the relatively dark interior, make the gold and jewels shine even more strongly. Sultan sat motionless on his throne. After the Sulaimans changed palace ceremony, he no longer stood up to honor ambassadors. He did not allow them to sit in his presence. He didn't even speak to them. He was also the first sultan to sit majestically on a throne in the European manner instead of sitting cross-legged on a raised platform. European visitors repeatedly described the effect as almost divine. They emphasized the sultan's immobility, the silence of the third court, and the feeling they were standing before a sacred figure. Ceremony was designed to emphasize the sultan's supreme position and the subordinate position of everyone who came before him. Okay, the palace pages. The young pages didn't all have the same rank. During their novice years, they concentrated mainly on education. The members of the three higher chambers were already actively serving the sultan. Promotion was based on merit, of course. A page could be promoted, but he could also be demoted. There was no automatic progression. A young man might progress from one chamber to another and eventually reach the privy chamber, which is on the left hand side of the third courtyard. But this was not guaranteed. Those who lacked talent couldn't be sent out of the palace to lower positions in the army. Some less ambitious pages even requested lower bureaucratic positions because they didn't want to continue under the rigid discipline of palace life. This created a system based on merit rather than hereditary aristocracy. There is a library here. The most talented slave pages could eventually rise to the highest non hereditary positions in the Ottoman government and military. Pages were organized into dormitories called chambers or oda. Their numbers changed over time. There were about 300, 400 pages in the late 15th century, around 500 by the mid 16th century, and about 700 by the early 17th century. Mehmet II's court records from 1478 to 1480 show that the pages were organized into five chambers: the chamber, the treasury, the commissary, the royal falconers, the gatekeepers. A similar organization is described by the contemporary observer Promontorio. He also mentions the five senior officials who headed these groups: the cupbearer, who was in charge of the privy chamber, the head treasurer, the head of the commissary, the head falconer, and the head gatekeeper. Small chamber, large chamber, yeah, different names you can see on sources. Okay, this is the pavilion of the Fatih Sultan Mehmet II, and actually there was a bath complex here. Today you can see the ceremonial clothes in this section, and here the treasure section. You can see famous spoonmaker's diamond and Topkapı dagger. And there is a movie. I think 1965. They made that movie, and they're trying to steal the Topkapi dagger from the palace. I'm really recommending you to watch it. You can see the 60s Istanbul where there is no bridge on the Bosphorus Strait. It's really nice. And also, you can see some golden ceremonial thrones inside and lots of stuff, lots of precious items. And here, the privy chamber side, it is actually the Islamic relics, Islamic holy mantle, and uh, all those holy relics are displayed, exhibited in that section. And now let me take you to the fourth courtyard. So let's continue. Yes, the garden and water. The lower level of Murat III's bedroom pavilion contained a pool surrounded by a marble balustrade. Water flowed into it from fountains. It functioned as a cool summer retreat and opened through arches onto the surrounding garden. Okay, if you come here, so there is a nice view. So you can see the Bosphorus Strait, the Aegean side, and Sea of Marmara, and the new city side of the European side of Istanbul, 19th century European style pavilion here, and Sofa Mosque here. And this is gorgeous view. This is the only place, this is the only city in the world you can see the Asian side and European side in one frame. And here it is. Look at this beautiful view. Sea of Marmara, the entrance of the Bosphorus Strait, the Aegean side, Bosphorus Bridge. If you go directly almost 32 kilometers long, it is the Black Sea, and you see the high skyscraper over there, business district area. What a beautiful color of the Bosphorus Strait. Let's go to the Marble Terrace and other kiosks. The hanging garden of the third courtyard, or fourth courtyard, we can say. The Marble Terrace. Now we come to one of the most exclusive spaces in the palace. Marble Terrace. I'm going to show you it. It's often described simply as the beautiful terrace with fish pool, but its importance is much greater. It was an extension of the privy chamber or Has Oda. You can see the Has Oda. Actually, it is two-story. During the winter, the Sultan used the domed halls of the privy chamber. During the summer, he moved to the marble terrace and the garden kiosks next to it. Together, the privy chamber, the marble terrace, and the garden kiosks formed a single royal complex. So this was essentially the Sultan's summer extension of the Has Oda. Look at this. An open-air throne hall. The marble terrace also functioned as an open-air throne hall. The Sultan could sit on his throne here, receive high-ranking officials, accept congratulations during religious holidays, and hold hand-kissing ceremonies. Beginning in the 17th century, extraordinary meetings of the Imperial Council were sometimes held here. So this was not simply a place for relaxation. Important matters of state could also be discussed here. Marble throne we see today was connected with these ceremonies. Religious holiday ceremonies, hand-kissing ceremonies, and the circumcision celebrations of princes were held here. The pool was much more than a decorative feature. Small boats could float on it. The Sultan was entertained here by dwarfs, buffoons, and other court attendants. The sound of the water was also part of the experience. The pool we see today is not the original one, actually. The original pool was considerably larger and was reduced in size during a 17th century remodeling. And one of the most valuable descriptions of the Marble Terrace comes from the English organ builder Thomas Dallin. 1599, Dallin came to the palace to install the mechanical organ presented by Queen Elizabeth I, Sultan Mehmed III. He became one of the earliest Europeans allowed to enter the Sultan's private quarters. According to his account, the portico was open on three sides. Curtains could be lowered when necessary. Enormous silk carpets scoured the floor, and there were no chairs or tables. Instead, there was the Sultan's ceremonial couch and the fish-filled pool beside it. And his account gives us an unusually detailed picture of how the marble terrace functioned. Mehmet III admired the mechanical organ presented by Queen Elizabeth I, but Sultan Ahmed I later ordered it to be dismantled. The moving figures on the organ were considered incompatible with Islamic sensitivities regarding images. The marble terrace could also be reserved for the Imperial Harem. The connecting passage could be closed so that man couldn't enter. The women of the harem could gather here to listen to music, enjoy entertainments, and spend time around the pool. And there were theatrical performances, puppet shows, musical concerts, comic performance. So the terrace could change function depending on who was using it. And this is the fountain of the Holy Mantle. When the sultans died, their bodies were washed at this marble fountain, which was repaired during the reign of Sultan Mahmud II. The fountain's inscription in praise of this repair is headed by Sultan Mahmud's Tura royal monogram. One of the most important developments connected with the Marble Terrace happened from the 17th century onward. The Ottoman sultans gradually began to emerge from the complete seclusion of the privy chamber. Instead of remaining entirely hidden, they appeared more frequently on the Marble Terrace. As a result, Grand Viziers, Chief Muftis, and other senior officials were occasionally admitted into royal spaces where they normally wouldn't have been allowed to enter. The Marble Terrace therefore reflects an important transformation in Ottoman court ceremony. The Sultan was becoming more visible. And the grand double row of columns attached to the exterior of the privy chamber opened toward the private royal garden. The garden contained a fish pool and several kiosks. And built over vaulted structures, it was designed as a private royal garden and as a natural extension of the privy chamber. Spacious summer kiosks complemented the heavy winter rooms of the palace. The vaulted portico served as an open reception and resting area. And here, the exterior walls of the privy chamber were faced with marble from Cairo. And blue, white, and turquoise underglaze painted tiles, bows, arrows, and various weapons were displayed on the walls. Some were believed to have been weapons used by Selim I during his conquest of Egypt. Others were memorials to the strength and skill of the later sultans who practiced archery and other royal sports. Among his objects was a heavy round stone that the sultan was said to have lifted with one finger through a ring. There were also thick shields said to have been pierced by a single javelin thrown by the Sultan. Other objects included silver bowls thrown with such force that they became embedded in an iron door, and the iron door opening onto the outer portico carried an inscription commemorating what the force having pierced it in three places. Here you can see. And here, let me show you the famous Revan Pavilion, uh, built between 1635-36 to commemorate Sultan Murad IV's conquest of Revan, today's Yerevan. The pavilion has an octagonal plan and three avans. It is also known as the turban room because the Sultan's clothes and turbans were kept here. The Revan Pavilion, where Huzur lectures were held during the Ramadans and where the holy relics were kept during the cleaning of the departments of the Prophet Muhammad's cardigan, was used as the Privy Room's library together with the Baghdad Pavilion from the 18th century onwards. It has an aesthetic value with its hand-drawn decorations, woodworks decorated with inlaid mother of pearl, ivory and tortoise shell, colorful marble panels and tiles, predominantly in blue color. Let me show you that. Look at this beauty. Here we have the throne for the evil Bayram and its pendant, throne of Sultan Ahmed I. Look at the emeralds, rubies, turquoise, Turkish stones, and lots of jewels. Now, one final artistic point is extremely important. The five large tile panels on the facade of the circumcision room were probably not originally made for this room. They were most likely produced for Suleiman's new kiosk. Look at them. Four panels show birds and chielins among intertwined saz leaves, lotus, palmettes, and rosettes. The chielin is a four-legged mythical creature derived from the Chinese mythology. The fifth panel shows birds among saz foliage growing from a vase. These designs represent an artistic tradition different from the later classical Ottoman style. The panels were later copied, although less successfully, in the 17th century, the tiles of the Baghdad kiosk. They are usually dated to the middle of the 16th century, but an earlier date, around 1530, 1540, has also been proposed. Their Saz designs have been associated with the Tabrizi artist Shahkulu. Shahkulu was listed as Suleiman's highest paid court painter in a wage register from 1526. The Saz style had roots in the Turkoman artistic tradition that developed in 15th century Tabriz and Herat. The connection between these particular panels and Shahkulu cannot be documented with certainty, but the similarity between the tile designs and Shahkulu's black line album paintings in the Saz style is clear. Süleyman's account books show that in 1527-28 tiles were produced in Istanbul for his renovated palace in a royal ceramics atelier known as the Kashihane-i Hassa atelier was directed by the chief ceramist Usta Ali with the assistance of court painters. The workshop had been founded by a Tabrizi ceramicist named Habib. Habib was one of the artisans brought to Istanbul after Selim I conquered Tabriz in 1514. Ustali appears in a 1526 wage register as Habib's highest paid assistant, so these tiles were not simply the work of anonymous craftsmen. They were produced through cooperation between ceramicists and court painters trained in the Tabrizi tradition. These 5 rectangular panels represent Timurid influenced Persianate aesthetic. This style was different from the classic Ottoman tile style developed in Iznik after the 1540s and 1550s. The earlier tiles used a blue, white, and turquoise color scheme with underglaze painting. This aesthetic continued to flourish until the classical Ottoman style was formulated around the middle of the 16th century. After that, the blue, white, turquoise palette gradually disappeared from the architectural tiles. It was replaced by a bolder floral aesthetic developed in Iznik. The new style used more vivid and contrasting colors. Red and green were added to the earlier limited palette, which had been strongly influenced by prestigious Chinese blue and white ceramics. So these panels are important not only because they are beautiful, they show an important moment of transition in Ottoman court art. We can see a movement from a Timurid, Turkoman, and Persianate aesthetic toward the classical Ottoman style that would dominate the later 16th century. So when we look at Topkapı Palace, we shouldn't think of it simply as a collection of beautiful buildings. Palace was designed as a political system made visible through architecture. Courtyards controlled movement. The gates controlled access. Silence increased as you moved toward the Sultan. The council hall represented justice and centralized government. The treasury represented wealth. The kitchen represented generosity. The third court represented the palace school and the Sultan's private household, and the harem gradually transformed from a relatively small training institution into the center of the royal family and an important political force. Even the artistic decoration tells the story of transformation. The early Persianate and Tabrizi traditions eventually developed into the classical Ottoman style. So Topkapi is not just a palace, it's a physical expression of how the Ottoman dynasty understood sovereignty, government, hierarchy, justice, family, and imperial power. So a nice golden horn view here. You can see the Galata Tower over there. So we are about to finish our Topkapı video. So lastly, I'm gonna show you the famous Baghdad Pavilion. It is really beautiful. From there, the view also very nice. I hope you could hear me very well. Okay. Baghdad Pavilion here again, built between 1638 1639 to commemorate the Sultan Murad IV's Baghdad expedition. The pavilion has an octagonal plan like the Revan Pavilion and 4 Evans. The pavilion, which was the Sultan's resting place, hosted official meetings and advisor councils in the following periods and was used as a privy rooms library from the 18th century onwards. In the 19th century, when the sultans came to Topkapı Palace for bestimal or enthronement ceremonies, they again chose this palace to rest. One of the most original examples of pavilion architecture with its elegant eaves and bay windows. The building is important with its malakari decorations, woodworks decorated with inlaid mother of pearl Ivory and tortoise shell, colorful marble panels, and green and blue is tiles. Oh my god, look at this. Beautiful. Okay, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video. So, lastly, let's show you the beautiful view of the Golden Horn from the Baghdad Pavilion. See you later. Bye bye.